Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. We're delighted you're here with us this Monday as we welcome Dr. Michael Lamb. I want to give you a quick announcement of what's coming today. After our morning session, we're going to move over to the Tadlock House where we have a coffee reception. You're very welcome to join us to spend some time in conversation with Michael and to have some things there to eat and drink. We'll then go over to lunch, and I emphasize this for faculty, staff, and also if you're interested in this as a student. We're going to have a special lunch in the Tipton room at 11:30. I can accommodate 25, so the first 25, you're very welcome to join us, and it'll be a nice lunch. It is not the regular cafeteria lunch. So we'll be there at 11:30, and again with some time for informal chat with Michael about some of the issues he's going to talk about this morning. This evening at 7 p.m., he'll be again in conversation with Glenn Sanders at Emmanuel Episcopal Church. That'll be at 7 p.m. And then we'll come back here for our next speaker will not be until after spring break on March 17th. So I'm introducing from the podium. I'll say a couple of things, although some of Michael's own biographical details are going to come out in what we do. He is a native of Middle Tennessee. Michael and I have the distinction, the Murray County Hospital in Middle Tennessee has the distinction of having seen both of us into the world. We were both there. And then several years later, we lived unknowingly about 3 blocks away from each other. This was in Memphis, Tennessee, as Michael was a student at Rhodes College and I was teaching in my first position, which reminds me that I'm a very old person. I was already teaching when he was an undergrad. He then won a Rhodes Scholarship. This is a scholarship program that allows you to go to Oxford University to do a second degree. And he went over and he studied philosophy and religion there at Oxford University before returning. He's worked in politics some. He was the chief of staff to State Senator Roy Herron for a time, and he has now been at Wake Forest for 9 years. At Wake, he not only teaches, he's also director of the Educating for Character Initiative, which is a large-scale project, a massive grant that has come to Wake, not for them to keep, but for them to distribute, and for them to build a network of colleges committed to building character. And so it's that subject that brings Michael here, and I'm now going to shift seats and talk to Michael. Well, please welcome Michael Lamb.
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be here. Great to be back in Tennessee for a little while.
That's good. I want to start with asking you a definition question. What exactly do we mean by character? This is a word we've probably all heard from a teacher, from a coach, from church. What exactly do we mean by character?
Yeah, so we understand character just to be the collection of dispositions or habits that shape how we think, feel, and act, often in moral or intellectual ways. So we often think about sort of good or bad character, and you can have both or either. And we think about traits of character that are good traits as virtues, those virtues like compassion or humility or justice, those habits that help us think, feel, and act in morally good ways. And we think about bad traits of character as vices, those things that might cause us to, do things that aren't fully flourishing for ourselves. And so how we think about helping students develop good character and the virtues like compassion, humility, justice that might help them flourish and help their communities flourish.
Okay. When we talked about this earlier, where you started was embedding this in your own story. And I think so often that's the best way for us to get at a question like this. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your own growth in character as a young person. You grew up on a farm in Middle Tennessee. How did that contribute to the growth of your own character?
Yeah, I grew up on a small family farm in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, about an hour south of Nashville. And that experience really taught me what it was to work with family. In a small farm, you don't have many acres, and so you often raise a few crops, and you also swap labor with your cousins and uncles. And so we were always swapping labor, helping them with their crops as they helped us with our crops. And so it taught you about teamwork and about how to actually join together in a common purpose. But also, it taught me how to work hard. At age 6, I was in the fields working with my family. We grew various crops, mostly tobacco and a few beef cattle. And so I began keeping my hours on a sheet on the fridge. Every hour I worked, I made a mark about that. And then by 13, I had my own crop. So I had my own crop, about a half an acre there by my house, and then grew to an acre the next year with my uncle's farm. And I saved that money from that crop to buy my first truck, a green and tan Ford Bronco. That was sort of my prize for a while. And it taught me the responsibility of working hard, but also of saving, of being thoughtful about how you actually show up in the world. That was very important for me, along with other parts of my own childhood, from my faith to my family, too. And so I think, for me, growing up in a small town, we had about 2,000 people in my town, so it was a very small place. And so you really feel community very deeply there. My granddad was a Methodist minister in my small town a few years before I grew up, and we went to the church there. Mom was in the, Mom sort of led the youth group for us, and so being in that sort of atmosphere in the Methodist church there, where I was being formed to think about what it means to live a good life, to love your neighbor as yourself, was very important for my own formation, as was having a family who really embodied character for me. My parents didn't graduate from college. My dad worked at a factory. My mom was a cafeteria manager at the local school, but they really embodied real citizenship and character. My dad was the school board president. He was he was actually school board member, president of the Lions Club, but also very active in the community. My mom was the one in town who was always gathering things for families at Christmas who needed them. When I was a student in Memphis, she found that students I was mentoring and tutoring there didn't have school supplies. So my home county is the pencil capital of Tennessee. And so she went around to different factories and gathered school supplies to take to students in Memphis. And even this past year, when the hurricane hit this region, she was the one in our town who really led an effort in our little small town to bring 8 truckloads of supplies, water, toys for the kids, hay for the animals, up to Irwin to help support families there. So I think her example of compassion was very important for me. So seeing my dad's example of sacrifice for us, working every day at a factory for 40 hours a week, coming home, changing his boots and going out again to work more on the farm, was a great example of hard work. And my mom's example of compassion really sort of inspired me in my own journey at college and beyond. One last story. My mom, when I was graduating from college my senior year, she gave me a letter she wrote me on her very first day as a mother to me. And in her little baby book, she wrote mom's first letter to her son. And in ballpoint pen, she wrote, "Dear Michael, hope you become a compassionate and kind person, one who helps those who are less fortunate than yourself." Those are her first words to me. And so I think my mom's own example of kindness and compassion really inspired me throughout my life.
You've hinted there strongly at the role of mentoring in the formation of character, and I wonder if you can take us then into the college experience, where we are doing this on the ground here. How did you find mentorship, and how did you find opportunities to grow character there at Rhodes?
I had terrific mentors in college. So my parents had not gone to college. I really relied on my mentors to give me advice my parents couldn't give me about what to major in or how to think about these big questions that they hadn't really encountered when they were growing up. And so I had some really dedicated mentors. In a small school like Rhodes or like King, you can have that sort of really intimate connection with faculty and staff that can be really meaningful, and it was to me. And so I was getting that sort of mentorship. I was also in the classroom trying to figure out what I could learn from the great traditions of thought across various disciplines, from history and literature to philosophy and religion. So my very first semester, I took a course called Search for Values, which sort of was a kind of great book style course where you sort of read these great books from history across different traditions and then try to figure out, what are your values and what should your values be? And that was my first real introduction to philosophy as a discipline, the study of wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom. And so I love thinking about these big questions. My sophomore year, I took a course called Hunger, Plenty, and Justice. And the question was, do we have a duty to aid the hungry? And we spent the semester on that question. We wrote a long-term paper, yes or no, and you had to defend your answer. But we also did service work in the community. And so I was delivering Meals on Wheels to people in their homes. I was working at soup kitchens as part of that work. And I had a service scholarship at Rhodes, where I spent 10 hours a week doing service and leadership on campus as part of my scholarship. And so that formation of really going into the community, going into the streets, transformed me profoundly there. I was someone who grew up in a small town, and often in rural areas, there's a lot of poverty, but it's often hidden. You don't see it in the same way. But in a big city like Memphis, it is there. You can't miss it. And so it was my first real encounter of putting issues like homelessness or hunger in a concrete form. and having to grapple with what's my duty in response to that. And so that sort of combination of deep work in the community and seeing these issues firsthand and having to sort of think about my own response to them. What is my obligation here? What do I owe my fellow citizens, my neighbors? And then studying the ways that people in the past have thought about that was a really great connection for me. So it really convinced me I want to study more philosophy and theology, but I want to make it matter. I don't just want to write articles that a few academics read, maybe, if you're lucky, in a journal somewhere, but actually to do work that really can help students and others think about how they want to live in the world. And to speak to people like my parents who didn't go to college but really care about how to live a good life. And so that was really the inspiration for my work in grad school and beyond.
Along the way, you almost played college baseball.
Almost, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and also about how the experience of being a baseball player affected you in terms of character building?
Yeah, well, I learned last night that about 80% of King students are student athletes, so it's nice to see you all here. Many of you here. I grew up playing sports in my small town. Sports were part of the culture there, so I grew up playing basketball and baseball. I was on the golf team in high school, which didn't mean very much in my small school, but baseball was my main sport there. I played throughout high school, on various teams throughout, all-star teams that went to North Carolina for the first time when I was 14 to play there. And that really formed me profoundly because on a team, as you all know who are athletes here, you're not alone in that sport. You're working with your team, with your coaches. You have to make sacrifice for a common purpose. You have to recognize your own limits. Especially in baseball, where if you're really, really good, you'll hit 3 out of 10 each time, right? It's batting 300, getting 3 hits out of 10 is a really successful average. So that means 7 to 10 times you might get out. And so you learn humility really quickly. And also courage. I mean, for me as a kid, learning to stand in the batter's box when a 90-mile-an-hour fastball comes your way takes a lot of courage. So I had to think about how I sort of calm myself in the face of those kind of regular activities in the sport. And so I think different sports teach different virtues in various ways. And I think for me, sports is a big part of my own life. And I think what we're doing now at Wake Forest is recognizing the ways in which sports can shape our character if we actually are intentional about that. And so think about your own time here at King. I mean, in your own sport, how do you actually bring your strengths of character to your teams? Is that by sort of bringing your hard work, by bringing your humility, by encouraging your teammates through generosity, by making sure your common purpose actually is achieved, not just for yourself, but for the entire team? So I think there are ways in which playing a sport can actually bring out your character, but also help to form it. So I think it's really important now, given that, as you all think about your own time here, you're trained to be leaders here, not just at King, but beyond. So how can your time in the classroom, in the community, and even on your sports teams help you be the kind of leader who brings your character to wherever community you end up landing? So I really encourage all of you to think about your character as you think about practicing your sport.
You mentioned your grandfather's a Methodist minister. You went to a Presbyterian college there at Rhodes, just like King is a Presbyterian college. I'm curious about the role of faith in the formation of character for you, whether it was growing up or experiencing the study of theology at Oxford, or whether it's participation in a local congregation. How are those things part of that package for you?
Yeah, I think our traditions always are forming us, whether we realize it or not. And I think for me, growing up in a place that really valued key virtues of character, that really the exemplars that I studied and lived with, and for my case, as a Methodist, Jesus was an exemplar of certain virtues like compassion to those in need, justice to those who were denied justice, humility and courage to cross boundaries that were cultural boundaries of his own time. And so for me, that model of compassion and care was really powerful for me. And I think the way in which communities of faith of different traditions actually encourage both aspiration but also accountability to that. And I remember when I was 13 years old in our confirmation Sunday, I remember on my bulletin signing my name at the top of it that day because the preacher gave a really impassioned sermon about how we need to live ethically, to live out these virtues. And so I wrote my name down as my commitment to myself and to God to actually be faithful to that vision. And so I kept that bulletin on my desk for years as a reminder to me of how to live and what to live for. And so for me, that's been an important part of my own journey. And now, having studied theology and studied the different ways that people across the tradition actually think about character, I'm much more aware now of how virtues like hope and love are important for navigating our lives. I've also been really thoughtful about how we navigate across different traditions. We have a very diverse society now in the U.S. as well as around the world. And what you see is different traditions, from Christianity and Judaism to Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism. They all really value character in some way. They have different approaches to that, different practices of that. But one of my key kind of callings now, I think, is to be someone who helps create spaces for that kind of exchange across traditions, because all of us are being formed in ways that can really shape who we are, but also how our communities are. And being aware of that formation is really important.
So you mentioned calling there, which has been an emphasis for us in terms of vocation. How do we discern who we're supposed to be, what we're called to do? And it seems to me that as we've taught that over the years, we've looked at exactly what you've just done, which is to look back at our own lives. Frederick Buechner says, listen to your life, and this is where you find this yourself being formed, and you learn about that. So I think that's great for us to start with. How is it that this is part of your story? I want to turn a little bit to Michael Lamb's Scholar of Character now, and we have titled this The Art of Virtue, Art of Character? Art of Virtue. I'm curious how you would sort of frame for us the task that's before us, the importance of forming virtue and character, and the ways that this is possible. So many times the world around us seems to be pitted against virtue, pitted against character. So what can you give us as a kind of a pep talk about forming character?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. You know, the art of virtue, that phrase comes from the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin, when he was around your age, around his early 20s, decided he wanted to sort of have a plan for achieving moral perfection. You know, very bold plan. And so he set out to do that. And so he developed a plan where he would choose a virtue each week. He defined them and then chose a virtue each week and would go through the week, think about how well he did that virtue. And every night he would put a black mark if he didn't do very well that day on that virtue. And his goal was really create a plan over a whole year, repeating that plan 4 times across the year to actually where his record was clean. And he would be a perfect virtue. That didn't happen, obviously, for Benjamin Franklin or for any of us. But he attributes his own happiness in life, his success as a citizen, as a leader, as a community member to that original plan to develop the art of virtue. And so he actually wanted to write a book called The Art of Virtue, which he never actually wrote. And so now I'm working with a colleague of mine from Oxford to write a book called The Art of Virtue on how we actually cultivate our character. And we've done research over the last decade or so about what does our tradition, what do the different disciplines teach us about how character is formed. And we found that across psychology and education and philosophy and even neuroscience, there are various methods that can be used to shape character. And so we named 7 in our work, and I'll just mention them quickly. If you have questions, I'm happy to talk afterwards about these methods. But first is just knowing what the virtues are, what we call virtue literacy, being aware of what the virtue is, how it differs from its vices, and then how to understand that virtue in your own life. That's the first one. Second one is reflection on experience. Right? We often have experiences in our lives that are shaping us and forming us. How do we think about those experiences? What we did well, what we could do better next time as a way to direct us going forward. Third is practice, like you would in a sport. You get more courageous, more compassionate by doing it over and over again until you become sort of second nature in that virtue. And that's really important. So think about how you might learn how to shoot a basketball or to throw a baseball. It's by doing it over and over again until you kind of perfect that motion, that act. And the same for virtue. Fourth, which is also relevant for sports, is you have a good coach or role model. People that you imitate, you look up to, you get their guidance from, you receive their instruction in ways to be better. The same thing applies to virtue and character. Fifth, being aware of our own self, our biases, our tendencies, where we fall short, so we can sort of choose situations where we avoid those temptations, but also sort of think about how we can show up better in situations that might call out both our virtue and our vice. Finally, moral reminders, those things that they might be reminded of who we want to be in the world. So that bulletin I told you about, that was a moral reminder to me to be a certain kind of person. If you sign an honor code at a college, that's a moral reminder to be a person of integrity on your academic work. If you have a favorite quote or verse that you memorize to kind of call to your mind when you're struggling or tempted, that can be a moral reminder. And then finally, and I think perhaps even most importantly for a college setting, is the role of friendship in shaping character. We are shaped by our friends. In fact, we'll spend more time each week with our friends than we will with our professors, right? So they're some of our best teachers. And so who are your friends? Are they encouraging you to be virtuous? Or perhaps not? Are they actually helping you be your best self or supporting you in times of difficulty? So asking about your friendships is crucial to that work. And research shows that friendships are very important for a good life.
As you mentioned that, it occurs to me to think in terms of lifespan development, that different virtues, different character traits probably form at different stages. For people who are currently undergraduates, where do you think our focus, you mentioned friendship, where else do you think we really embed ourselves at that stage in the study of virtue?
Yeah, I think one thing about virtue is really important is that unlike other forms of ethics, which often think about hard cases of ethical conflicts, we have to choose between one thing or another thing in a difficult moment. Virtue is an everyday practice. We can be virtuous or vicious in how we treat our roommates, and how we show up in the classroom, and how we talk to our siblings or our parents, right? There's very ordinary ways to practice these different dispositions. And so I think it's really important to recognize you always have chances to practice being more courageous or more compassionate or more humble in whatever place you find yourself in. But I think especially important for this age group, and what research shows is that emerging adults from 18 to 29, that's most of you here, have various things they're experiencing now compared to past generations. So emerging adults are often attending more school than in the past. They're waiting longer to get married or to have children. They are moving more frequently across the country. They're taking more jobs. And so there's more instability, which means that it can often be a time of deep sort of flux in your own sense of self and sense of purpose. And research shows it can be a self-focused time, because the things that might pull you out of yourself, like a marriage or a community or children, are not yet part of your experience for many of us. And so we think a lot about what are the virtues that might help respond to these trends among emerging adults. So we think, for example, about the importance of purpose. Having a calling or vocation in your own life that can give you meaning in how you order your days, can give you direction and focus in what you choose to do or not do. It can also give you resilience. Research shows that if you have a sense of purpose that's strong, you're more resilient, because each setback is not something you give up on. You keep going because you have a purpose to achieve in your life. And so I think purpose right now is especially important. Also, those virtues might help draw us out of ourselves are really important. So, for example, gratitude is one of those virtues that helps us recognize those around us who contribute to our lives in some meaningful way. And so recognizing that, then actually acting on that to express gratitude can be a great way to orient ourselves beyond just our own immediate interest. So I think purpose and gratitude are two really good virtues right now, I think, to think about in this context.
And what about for yourself? Is this a moment in life where there's a particular virtue formation that is presenting itself to you that you're particularly invested in?
Yes, I think one thing about virtue and character is that it's developing always in your life. It's forming or being deformed depending on how you think about your life. And I think for me, I have a very clear sense of my calling and my purpose. What I'm working on now is really the virtue of courage. Courage is a virtue we often think about in terms of these heroic moments of action, standing up to someone or fighting in battle or doing something very big and bold. And I think that's true. And there are more ordinary ways to be courageous, including even in how you show up in friendships, in the classroom for me as a professor. So I think I'm trying to be more courageous and being more open and vulnerable in the classroom. My tendency as an oldest child in a small town who was told that when I was in 6th grade, I got to get a scholarship to college. You got to achieve these things to get a scholarship, that we can't afford it. I was sort of formed to please people and meet and exceed their expectations for me. And so that was my formation, and it worked really well. It helped me get to where I wanted to go. And often the things that can be sources of light can also be sources of shadow. And I think for me, as I reckon with my own shadows, I see the ways in which my own tendency to try to meet others' expectations is both the gift, but also can limit me and make me less aware of my own sort of callings inside. And so my own sort of virtue this year is courage to really hear myself, to listen, as Buechner would say, to my own life and what it's telling me. And then once I hear it, not to ignore it, not to press it down, but to have the courage to really embrace and enact that vision of my life. And so that's where I'm really trying to enact courage. I love that the root word for courage in French and Latin is from the same word as heart, right? Courage comes from our heart. And I think we often about courage as being a matter of our strength. But if it's about our heart, then how do we soften ourselves to actually be courageous in more kind of invisible, maybe internal ways too? And that for me has been my calling this year.
I'm reminded of this moment in To Kill a Mockingbird where Atticus Finch is pointing out the woman who's struggling with addiction, and he says she's showing more courage than you have any idea of here, right, as she faces that down. Another virtue that you've written about that is one that I think is relevant for our entire world at the moment is the virtue of hope. You have a book called The Commonwealth of Hope about Augustine and his political thought. How is it that you think that hope is an important virtue for us now, and how do we find it, and how do we cultivate it?
Yeah, I think a lot about hope, and I think there are reasons we have in our world right now to despair, very present reasons for us to despair, and they've always been there, and I think we just have to be aware of them. Many of us think about hope as the same as optimism or positive thinking. And that's how our culture treats it. It's the same thing. But I think there's an older tradition of thinking about hope as a virtue that Augustine, for example, or St. Thomas Aquinas really elevate in their work. And I'm trying to lift that virtue up for our contemporary moment. And so to be a virtue means that hope doesn't, like optimism, expect things to always turn out well. It's not certainty that things will be okay. It's a hope they will be, but it's not a certainty about that. Moreover, it's not just a feeling or a mood or an emotion we have, but a virtue, a habit we have to cultivate through practice and hard work. So hope really requires deep work. It's not as easy as optimism or positive thinking. It really requires disciplining your own habits in ways that is hopeful toward the world, but also not false in your hope. And that's one reason I think the virtue is very important. A virtue often finds a middle way between two vices. And hope finds a way between, on the one hand, despair, the lack of hope, which we need to sort of overcome, but also what the tradition calls presumption or false hope, where we assume things or presume things might actually happen that might not. So there's a kind of pridefulness in presumption that we have to avoid. And so we need humility to avoid that kind of presumption. So I think hope as a virtue avoids both despair and presumption in ways that orients us to see what's possible and to work for it, to resist despair, but not be so optimistic that we actually presume that we don't have to work for it because it's already going to happen, right? So hope is a posture that cultivates good work. And I think right now, when we face temptations toward despair or presumption, we need the work of hope to actually create conditions in our own communities to really bring about the life that we want to see. St. Augustine says, this great quote from a sermon I love, he says, bad times, hard times, that's what people keep saying, but let us live well, and the times shall be good. We are the times. Such as we are, such are the times. Or he says elsewhere, he says, you're hoping for the good, be what you hope for. And I think right now, we can do a lot in ourselves by being what we hope for, and then through that example, rippling out that hope beyond ourselves into our communities. So I encourage all of you to be what you hope for as one way to enact hope in a moment when you might feel quite despairing.
So are there certain practices that we can try to cultivate in order to be that hope?
Yeah, I think various practices. I'll maybe mention three quickly. One is think about who are your role models or exemplars of hope. Perhaps from history, people you really admire. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., for example, who really embodied hope when he had all the reasons to despair about success in the civil rights movement. Think about people in your own family, your community, who might embody hope when they've really come through a hard diagnosis, for example, or a difficult life struggle. They can be sort of inspiration for you to really emulate their example. Secondly, you can practice it over and over again, and also have sort of practices in your life that help cultivate hope. So, for example, I teach hope every year to my students, and one student who entered college as a reformed pessimist, she claimed, said that she became more hopeful because she practiced gratitude. When you think about all the things you're grateful for and the people who helped you along the way, then you can recognize that even when you feel alone, even when you feel down, people around to help you, and that kind of gratitude can help sort of bolster your hope. So I think that's the second way. And then I think finally, I think friendships, and friendships that achieve common projects. Often we not hope for things, but hope in others to achieve them. So hopes are very relational. And we have common projects, be it a common group project in a class or maybe a common purpose on a sports team, right? You actually hope in your teammates, your lab partners, in ways that help you actually foster your hope to achieve something together as a team. And that can be a great way to actually bolster your hope for a common project.
Right. Building on that, that sense of practicality, one of the things that I appreciate so much about your scholarship is that it's not about, as you say, the journal article that 10 people are going to read, but you're trying to do something that is going to help actual people in actual living, that this academic study has a practical effect for us. Thinking of that practical side of things, what do you have for us as some practical wisdom for our daily living now?
Yeah, well, I think one thing I would say is that the most important parts of my own character journey has been my mentors and my friends. And I think it's easier for us to think about sort of the content of our work, you know, what you need to do in your biology class or what your psych exam requires of you, right, if you want to get an A on this test. But who are you going to be in relationship to others is a big, important question. So think about who are your friends right now in college, and what kind of friends are they? You know, in ancient Greece, Aristotle mentioned 3 kinds of friends: friends of pleasure, who you enjoy doing things with; friends of utility, who are useful to you in some way, maybe a lab partner or a business partner, right? And then finally, friendships of character, which call you to your best self, which support you in times of difficulty, but also hold you accountable to your highest vision for who you want to be in life. And those kind of friends actually are honest with you when you make mistakes. They're caring for you when you're struggling. They don't give up when it's hard, right? And friends of pleasure or utility often give up when it's not pleasurable or useful to them anymore, right? But those friends of virtue really stay with you in a deep way. And so find friends of virtue in college or in your work. I think that's the most important thing I can say right now. Find friends who really call you to be a better person, who hold you accountable, offer correction and care, and who really inspire you to be the kind of person you want to be. And I think for me, I have such amazing friends right now, and I think that I'm so grateful for that, because those friendships have been very important for me in helping me be the kind of person that I want to be.
One final question. I want to ask you to reflect on a particular mentor of yours, who is Roy Herron. Roy was a senator from the western part of Tennessee, and Michael worked as his chief of staff, worked on some campaigns with him, and I'd like you to give us just a little picture of who he was as a person of character in politics, and how that shaped you.
Yeah, I think Roy spoke here, I think, at one of these series at King a few years ago. You know, Roy was an amazing man. He died tragically last year, unexpectedly, in an accident. He was hit by another person on a jet ski and died tragically. But he had a full life. Here's a guy who was a 11-time Ironman triathlete. He ran about 40 marathons in his life. He'd gone to these great universities, taught at Vanderbilt Law and Divinity School, but really was passionate about doing the right thing. And when I worked for Roy, I never worried about compromising my integrity, because he was such a man of deep integrity. He wrote a book on faith and politics. He was a Methodist minister for a long time, so he's come out of his own deep tradition of faith. And he thought a lot about compassion. And for me, I would just think about the memories of Roy, often in ordinary ways. And Roy, we go to the restaurant to have a working lunch, for example, and in the parking lot, someone would stop him, and he would spend 10 minutes there at their window in their truck, like hearing their story about their suffering, the person who didn't have health care, or the woman who had cancer, and just seeing his compassion every day in that. He always saw the people that many others didn't see. You know, whether that be the people at the fast food restaurant we stopped in on the campaign trail, or the people who looked to him for real guidance and inspiration. And so I think seeing Roy's passion for justice, for compassion, for being an honest person was really, for me, very inspiring. And it gave me hope, actually. Amidst all that we see in the world, there are people in politics who do care about the right things. We have to find them. We have to elect them. And we have to be them. So I just want to encourage you to think about how you might be one of those people, because we need people who actually will serve. There's a great quote from Plato that I'll end on. He said, "The punishment for those who do not serve in office is to be ruled by lesser people. So what role do we have, be that as teachers or as nurses, psychologists, ministers, historians, to actually be the kind of people who live the character we want to see in the world, and by doing that, create conditions for others to be more virtuous.
I'm now going to give you an unusual opportunity, which is to move to the podium if you like.
I'd like to. Great. Thank you, Martin. And I do have a special presentation this morning I want to make this morning. This year, the Educating Character Initiative that I lead at Wake Forest has created a new award, the Nathan O. Hatch Leader of Character Award, to honor an outstanding leader of character in higher education who has shown exceptional commitment to educating character at their institution and beyond in the larger community. The award is named after one of my mentors, Dr. Nathan O. Hatch, the former president at Wake Forest University, who had the vision for establishing the program for leadership and character that I lead there and helping to create the Educating Character Initiative that now is helping hundreds of thousands of people across the country think about character in their own context. In addition to his own leadership in this way, Dr. Hatch has been his own exemplar of how character can be the foundation of wise, compassionate, and courageous leadership that empowers others to fulfill their promise in their own ways. So this award consists in a copy of Dr. Hatch's new book, The Gift of Transformative Leaders, and a coin that's still being created that is engraved with the names of its recipients and their institution. The design reflects the ancient Greek origins of the word for character, which actually means in ancient Greek, the imprint or mark on a coin. And so this coin actually reflects those who actually have imprinted us in various ways and whose own character has been imprinting others in their own context, in their own communities, far beyond their own realization. And so this year, in this spirit, we want to honor the person who's been an exemplary leader of character, who has left an imprint on their institution and all those they've influenced by their example. So this year, we're pleased to announce the first inaugural Nathan O. Hatch Leader of Character Award to King's University Dean Glenn Sanders. So please join me in welcoming Glenn. Take 1 minute. 1 minute. You all know why Glenn deserves this award. Let me tell you a little bit more about why we think he deserves this award. In addition to being a beloved professor and dean here at King, Glenn is an Educating Character Initiative partner who has gone above and beyond to contribute to our community and to building communities of character at King and the wider ECI community. As a member of our community, he's always someone who shows up. He's a regular presence in our webinars and book club discussions, and has personally attended or recommended people from King to attend every in-person event that we've hosted as an initiative. At our major conference in December on educating character across differences, Glenn served as a panelist in a key session. And for another session, he actually convened a group of people thinking about character in faith-based institutions. That was really a highlight of the conference. At every opportunity, Glenn has been a humble, eager, and active learner who's embraced the complex and nuanced dimensions of educating character across diverse contexts, bringing to each experience an open mind and an open heart. In the year we've worked with Glenn in this initiative, he has shown himself to be a steadfast advocate for King, quick to give credit and gratitude to his colleagues, thoughtful about King's students, always seeking opportunities to contribute to the character of this institution. Glenn took the lead on developing the project, Thoughtful, Resourceful, Responsible, 3 years forming character at King, earning one of our first grants as an Educating Character Initiative that now is helping students here and beyond think about character in their own lives. Glenn, as you all know, is a storyteller with an ability to convey the experience of a project in creative ways that invite everyone to share an enthusiasm about building communities of character. The Educating Character Initiative at Wake Forest has benefited greatly from his leadership and from being granted a share in his success and the impact here he's had at King. We imagined our initiative a few years ago. We imagined a community of aligned partners working together to educate character in colleges and universities across this country. In Glenn Sanders, we found not only a partner, but a friend. While Glenn will soon retire from the position as Dean of College of Arts and Sciences here at King, a role he's held since 2018, we are confident that his legacy of leadership and character has left a lasting imprint on us, on this institution, and on the broader character community. We can think no one more deserving of this inaugural Nathan O. Hatch Leader of Character Award than Glenn Sanders. So please join me in honoring Glenn Sanders.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb. President Tooley could not be with us today. He is traveling, so I'm going to read a few comments about this momentous occasion. I'm sorry to be traveling for this momentous event, but I wanted to offer my warmest congratulations to Dr. Sanders on receiving the Nathan O. Hatch Leader of Character Award. Dr. Sanders' selection as the inaugural recipient of this award speaks both to the kind of person he already is and to the life he continues to pursue. The virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, curiosity, and humility are not achievements one obtains and then possesses, but rather lifelong pursuits that to a large degree always feel, and in a real way are, elusive. As a leader of character, Dr. Sanders models for us the daily persistence required for the cultivation of these virtues. In his work to nurture character formation at King University and beyond, Dr. Sanders inspires us all to imagine with him a world in which the pursuit of virtue shapes not only our individual lives, but our families, our civil society, and our institutions. I want to say one more thing about Dr. Sanders and all those who pursue character virtues, and that is this. The pursuit of character is never a solitary affair. Yes, it is often represented as a personal quest of an inner struggle that one must master, but it is in reality a communal affair. The pursuit and development of virtue must bear out in this community. I applaud and enthusiastically celebrate Dr. Sanders for his wonderfully generous efforts to challenge and encourage us all to be a community of character. Congratulations, Dr. Sanders. Without further ado, you are dismissed.